Okay, so you may know from my previous lessons that I'm a big fan of really understanding how your examiner marks your IELTS test. Therefore, we need to understand the marking criteria, and if you know what is required for a band 7 or a band 8 score, then all you need to do on the day is deliver exactly that. Now, in the previous two lessons, we've looked at two other sections of the marking criteria. That was fluency and coherence and task achievement. If you missed them, please log on to my YouTube channel at Total IELTS. But today we're going to focus on everyone's favorite, and that's grammatical range and accuracy. Now, of course, I'm being a little bit sarcastic and mean, I guess. Grammar is something a lot of people struggle with. However, it is a big part of the IELTS test, and good grammar really does benefit you in the four sections of the IELTS test: reading, writing, listening and speaking. So it's definitely worth your attention and focus. So hopefully you find today's lesson useful, and again, please log on and hit that subscribe button and or ask any question that you may have. Some candidates still seem to think that certain examiners are nicer than others. And, there's this understanding that an examiner just walks into the test, listens to some of your grammar and simply decides, yeah, this person might be a 7 or an 8. No, they don't work like that. In fact, IELTS have done a really good job of setting out the criteria for each score. And if you don't meet that criteria, you simply won't get that score. So the examiner needs to hear this evidence. So my aim today is to make sure that you fully understand what is required for each band score, because grammatical range and accuracy is often misunderstood. It's commonly referred to as simply grammar. And indeed, yes, it does assess your grammar, but it's a lot more than just, using the correct tense or the correct grammatical structure. You need to have a range of grammar. Now, you may have come across the word range in a previous lesson that I taught on lexical resource, because there I tried to teach you to use a range of vocabulary, because that's exactly what the IELTS marking criteria wanted for that particular section. Now, the same applies when we use grammar. It's very important that you use a range of complex structures when you are expressing yourself. And the best way to do that really is to avoid responding with short answers, because longer answers are obviously going to give you a better chance of touching on a variety of grammatical structures. Let's have a look at a sample IELTS question, and I want you to see for yourself how limited this particular answer is in terms of the grammar that this candidate chooses. Now, the candidate was asked to describe a friend who you look up to as a role model. And this is the following answer that he gave. I look up to my brother Giovanni. He is very ambitious. Giovanni lives in Rome. He studies English. He will take IELTS next month. He wants to study at University College London. Students at University College London must have a 6.5 in IELTS. There's nothing hugely wrong with that answer. However, if you do look at the marking criteria, you'll see that the examiner would struggle to give that particular candidate a higher score, simply because the answer doesn't really flow. It doesn't have many complex sentences. The speaker only uses the present simple and future simple, and it almost sounds robotic and unnatural. And this not only affects the grammatical range and accuracy score, but it also has a negative impact on fluency and coherence. Now let's listen to an improved version of this answer, and one that contains more complex structures and tenses. And I want you to notice the difference in the quality of the answer here. So here comes the answer. That has to be my brother Giovanni for being so ambitious.
Giovanni, who lives in Rome, is studying English. He's taking IELTS next month because he would like to study at University College London, which requires an IELTS score of 6.5. I think you'll agree that this answer is a lot better for the simple reason that the speaker has introduced a variety of tenses and structures. The meaning hasn't really changed. It also sounds a lot more fluent, okay? And remember, I keep saying this, that grammatical range and accuracy and fluency and coherence are linked together in many ways, because poor grammar can also disturb the flow of your answer. So this particular answer is quite fluent because there are more complex structures. The speaker uses relative clauses, a conjunction, the speaker has used a greater variety of tenses with the present simple and present continuous. Again, this is what is required if you do want to move up to the higher band scores.
It's one thing having a range of grammar, but what happens if you can't use that grammar accurately? And accuracy refers to how correctly you use the grammar. It's not necessarily about the number of mistakes, and that's very important because the examiner isn't going to count each mistake that you make. However, he or she is going to notice any mistake with more simple structures, like basic tenses like the present simple. I mean, if you can't produce the present simple properly, well, that's going to stand out a lot more than something like the first conditional, which will be considered a more advanced or complex structure. So when it comes to accuracy, it's important that you do get the basics right, but it also means that if you want to go higher up the band scores, you need to be getting the more complex structures correct also. So I want to show you an example of a typical error that might stand out and have a negative impact on your band score for grammatical range and accuracy. So this particular candidate was asked, have you ever been to a foreign country? Now, obviously, the question is referring to the past, but this particular candidate failed to listen to the question properly and obviously didn't realize that the examiner was referring to the past. He answered with, I'm going to France next year. Now, this is a typical mistake that could be easily avoided, and it's a simple listening error more so than anything. So this is what I'm referring to when I say silly mistakes or basic mistakes. So what would be a better answer here? The candidate could have answered with, I've never been abroad. Okay, and that's referring to the past. And then the candidate could have gone on to say, but I'm going to France next year. So that would have been fine. It would have answered the question directly, and then he or she would have been able to talk about future plans. Okay, so it's very important to listen for tenses in the questions. Let's have a quick look at the marking rubric for grammatical range and accuracy so that we know what exactly the examiner needs to hear at the various band scores. So at band 5, we can see that answers normally consist of simple sentences that are relatively error-free. Now, what does relatively mean? Well, it means mistakes do exist, but not many. So if you use the simple past, present, and future pretty well, you're hitting a band 5 in grammatical range and accuracy. So the reason for this is because there isn't enough variety. Even if a band 5 candidate does try to attempt more complex grammar, they're going to make many errors and even possibly confuse their examiner. So let's look back at the marking criteria again, and we'll see that as we move up to band 6, 7, and 8, the range of grammar is increasing while the number of errors are actually decreasing. So in other words, the candidates are being more accurate with a range of grammar. But it's interesting to note that even at band 6 and 7, mistakes still do occur. Because remember, these mistakes are made from more complex structures. So the examiner is going to be give a lot more allowances and be a little bit more lenient towards those types of errors. So what does your typical band 8 or 9 scorer sound like? Well, they're definitely going to use a range of grammar, but they're going to be able to use it correctly. So really, you can't have one without the other. And it's not enough to just play it really safe and use simple grammatical structures and basic tenses. Yes, you might be using them correctly and accurately, but you're not producing that range that we are speaking about. Okay, so jumping from a band 5 to a band 7, 8 or 9 in grammatical range and accuracy isn't going to happen overnight. And this is why IELTS recommend that you have at least an intermediate level of English before starting your IELTS preparation. Grammar takes time, and while a lot of candidates like to go out and purchase the latest IELTS grammar book, grammar can be learned through social activities, through listening to TV or radio or watching your favorite movie with subtitles, for example. There is a myth when it comes to IELTS grammar because there really is no such thing as IELTS grammar. Grammar is grammar, whether you use it in the IELTS test or in a coffee shop. So please be aware of that, even though many publishers like to think otherwise. For candidates who really struggle with grammar, I think it's really important that you focus on speaking fluently and making sense. This has to be your priority, because if you're going to attempt difficult grammar that you're not familiar with, well, this is really going to damage your score and it's going to confuse your examiner. So there's more to the marking criteria than grammatical range and accuracy. So know your strengths and weaknesses. Yes, you may be trying to provide a range, but it will backfire on you if you're not making sense. A good rule of thumb that I always tell my students is, if you feel you are making a lot of mistakes during the speaking exam, avoid very long sentences and complicated ideas, because at least then you can get some confidence back. Similarly, there is no point in thinking about grammar during your test. So this is another common thing that happens, because even though I've taught you how important grammar is, it's not the right time to be thinking about it, because it's going to distract you from actually answering the question. Remember, you've got to think of vocabulary as well. And grammar is one of those things that has been built into you over a long period of time. So it should kind of come naturally during the test. If you're going to be worrying about what you said in the previous sentence, or whether or not you used a particular grammatical structure, well, then you're going to be pausing a lot and you're going to lose focus, and that's going to affect your fluency and coherence score, and we don't want that to happen.